For 13 years, I never questioned it. Not once. People notice strange things in marriages all the time. One spouse always sleeps with the TV on. The other refuses to eat the last slice of pizza. Someone folds towels a certain way. Someone insists on locking the front door 3 times before bed. You stop asking why after a while. It just becomes part of who they are. That's what I thought this was. Just Emma being Emma. If we were home alone, she'd say my name constantly. Jake, can you grab my phone? Jake, did you feed Max? Jake, you're impossible. Sometimes she'd stretch my name out whenever she wanted something. Jake, I'd laugh every single time. When we argued, she'd say it differently. Short, sharp. Jake, the kind that instantly let me know I'd forgotten to take the trash out again. And every night before bed, she'd kiss my forehead and whisper, "Good night, Jake." My name had always sounded safest in her voice, which is probably why it took me 13 years to notice something impossible. The first time wasn't really the first time. It was only the first time I became aware of it. We were having dinner with our neighbors. Tom and Lisa had just moved in across the street, and Emma insisted we invite them over. Everything was going well. Tom was telling some story about accidentally locking himself out of his own house wearing nothing but pajama pants. Lisa couldn't stop laughing. Emma was laughing too. At one point, she stood up to refill everyone's drinks. She looked toward me. "Could you help me for a second?" I followed her into the kitchen. "What do you need?" She pointed at one of the serving bowls. "Can you bring that out?" "Sure." I carried it back to the table without thinking. Later that night, while loading the dishwasher, I smiled. "You know." "What?" "You could have just said my name." She looked up. "I did." "No. You said, 'Could you help me?'" She frowned. So? So there were 4 people in the room. You could have just said, "Jake, can you help me?" She stared at me for a second, then shrugged. I guess. That was it. No awkwardness, no hesitation, nothing that made me think about it again. Until a month later, we were at a crowded farmer's market on a Saturday morning. Emma loved those places. Fresh bread, local honey, flowers she'd somehow keep alive despite insisting she was terrible with plants. I was paying for coffee when she wandered toward another stall. A few minutes later, I couldn't see her anymore. I figured she'd gone to look at vegetables. As I started walking through the crowd, I realized something strange. If I'd been the one who got lost, I would have called her Emma. Simple, normal. Instead, I felt someone tap my shoulder. I turned around. There she was, smiling. "There you are." I laughed. "I've been looking for you." "I know. Why didn't you call my name?" She blinked. "I found you." "I know. But why didn't you just yell my name?" She shrugged again. It was crowded. That answer sounded reasonable enough, until I thought about it later. Being crowded was exactly why people shouted names. That's the whole point. I forgot about it again. Life moved on. Weeks turned into months. Then my younger sister invited us to her birthday dinner. About halfway through the evening, she asked me to grab another bottle of wine from her kitchen. I got distracted talking to my brother-in-law. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. From the dining room, I could hear everyone laughing. At one point, I realized Emma probably wanted me back. I waited. Surely she'd call me. Instead, my sister walked into the kitchen. "Emma asked me to come get you." I looked up. Why didn't she come herself? I don't know. Why didn't she just call my name? My sister shrugged. She just said, "Can you get my husband?" Something about that sentence stayed with me. My husband. Not Jake. Not him. My husband. When we got into the car, I asked her, "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I don't think I've ever heard you say my name around other people." She laughed. "Of course you have." "I don't think I have." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're imagining things." Maybe I was. I honestly hoped I was. But once an idea settles into your head, it starts collecting evidence all by itself. And over the next few weeks, evidence was everywhere. At the grocery store, she'd say, "Could you grab the milk?" Never. "Jake, could you grab the milk?" At restaurants, "My husband will have the salmon." Never. "Jake will have the salmon." At family gatherings, "Can you come here for a second?" Never my name. At church, at the hardware store, at my niece's graduation, at my office Christmas party, not once, not a single time. One evening, lying in bed, I tried to remember the last time I'd heard Emma say my name in front of another person. I couldn't. Not because it had been a long time, because I couldn't remember it ever happening. And somehow, that frightened me more than I wanted to admit. I wish I could tell you I let it go, that I laughed at myself, that I accepted Emma had one harmless little habit and moved on with my life. I didn't, because once I noticed it, I couldn't stop hearing the silence. You'd be surprised how loud a missing word can become. The following Friday, we met my parents for dinner. Halfway through the meal, my dad dropped his fork. "Jake!" I looked up. "Can you pass the pepper?" I handed it to him. A few minutes later, my mom smiled. "Emma, could you tell Jake about your new flowers?" Emma looked at me. "They finally bloomed." I smiled. "They look great." The conversation continued. Then my dad asked, "So who's driving home?" Emma answered before I could. "He is." Not, "Jake is." Just, "he." It was so natural, no one else reacted. No one except me. On the drive home, I kept replaying every sentence she'd spoken, every single opportunity, every single time she'd found another way. The next week, I asked Kevin about it. We'd worked together long enough that he knew when something was bothering me. "What are you thinking about?" I hesitated. Then I said, "Have you ever heard my wife say my name?" He frowned. "What? My name? When we're together?" Kevin laughed. "Of course. When?" He opened his mouth, stopped, thought about it. "Huh." I watched his face change. I actually can't remember, right? He leaned back. "That's weird." "I know." He scratched his chin. "Maybe she just likes saying my husband." "No, it's not just that. She won't say it." Kevin laughed. "Come on. I'm serious. You think your wife physically can't say your name?" "I don't know. I just know she doesn't." He shook his head. "You've officially become a detective." "I wish." A few days later, we went shopping for a new couch. The furniture store was enormous. At one point, I intentionally walked into another section without telling Emma. Not to trick her, at least. That's what I told myself. 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. She smiled. "There you are." I looked around. "You found me." "Yeah, you walked through half the store." "I guess. You could have just called my name." For the briefest moment, something changed in her face. Not fear, not panic. More like discomfort. "I don't like shouting." I nodded. "Fair enough. Except, a little boy ran past us. He couldn't have been older than 6. Emma laughed again. "No worries." I didn't say another word, but something inside me froze. She had shouted, loudly, without hesitation. She'd just done it for someone else's child. So why not me? That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I quietly got out of bed and walked downstairs for a glass of water. As I passed the living room, I heard Emma talking, softly. At first I thought she'd gotten a phone call. Then I realized she was asleep. She was talking in her sleep. I stood in the doorway. She turned slightly on the couch, whispered something. I couldn't understand the first few words. Then I heard it, clear as day. "Jake!" I stopped breathing. "Don't leave yet." Another pause. Then, "Jake, please." Tears were running down her face even though she was asleep. I gently touched her shoulder. "Emma." Her eyes flew open. She looked around, confused. "What happened?" "You were dreaming." She immediately wiped her face. "I was crying." "Yeah." She looked embarrassed. "I don't remember." "You said my name." She froze. "What?" "You kept saying my name." For a second, she simply stared at me. Then she quietly stood up, walked past me, and went back upstairs without saying another word. The following morning, she acted as if none of it had happened. No mention of the dream, no mention of my name, nothing. But this time, I noticed something new. Every time she almost looked like she was about to say Jake in front of someone. She stopped herself. It wasn't natural. It wasn't unconscious. It was a decision. A split-second choice she made over and over and over again. And for the first time, I became certain of one thing. Emma wasn't forgetting my name. She was avoiding it. The next few days became an experiment. Not Emma's, mine. I stopped paying attention to what she said. Instead, I started paying attention to the moments right before she spoke. That's where I noticed it. It wasn't that she naturally avoided my name. It was that she almost said it every single time. It happened so quickly most people would never notice. Her lips would part. She'd inhale. Then something would stop her, like she'd slammed on the brakes inside her own mind. And she'd choose different words instead. One Saturday, we were helping my parents clean out their garage. My dad had boxes stacked everywhere. Emma was standing across the driveway while I wrestled with an old bookshelf. She needed my attention. I could tell. She looked directly at me, opened her mouth, paused, then she walked the entire length of the driveway instead. She tapped my shoulder. "Could you help me for a second?" I looked at her. "You were going to call me." "No, you were." "I wasn't. You stopped yourself." She laughed. "I think you're becoming paranoid." Maybe I was, but this wasn't paranoia anymore. I'd seen it. She'd been about to say my name. I was sure of it. A week later, we met some friends for dinner. There were 6 of us around the table. Everyone talking over one another. Halfway through the meal, our friend Melissa asked Emma a simple question. "So, how did you two meet?" Emma smiled. "Oh, my husband actually spilled coffee all over me." Everyone laughed. Melissa looked at me. "No way." I nodded. "It was completely my fault." Emma rolled her eyes. "He ruined my favorite coat. You still married me." I must have hit my head. More laughter. Then Melissa smiled. "I've known you guys for years. I don't think I've ever heard you call him by his name." The entire table went quiet. Emma's smile disappeared. Only for a second, then she laughed. "Really?" Melissa nodded. "Yeah. I've honestly never noticed." Neither had anyone else, until someone pointed it out. Emma picked up her glass of water. "Oh, I guess I'd just say my husband." Melissa smiled. "That's actually kind of cute." Everyone moved on. Everyone except me, because while everyone else laughed, I watched Emma's hand. She was gripping the glass so tightly her fingertips had turned white. On the drive home, neither of us spoke for almost 15 minutes. Finally, I said, "See?" She kept looking through the windshield. "What?" Melissa noticed. So it's real." Emma sighed. "I never said it wasn't." I looked at her. That was the first crack. "You've been telling me I imagined it." "I know. So why?" "I don't know." "Emma, I really don't know." "You don't know, or you don't want to tell me." She pulled into our driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there without moving. Finally, she whispered, "I'm afraid if I tell you, you'll think I'm crazy." I smiled softly. "I've been married to you for 13 years. I've seen you eat peanut butter with pickles. I think we're way past crazy." She laughed, a real laugh. For a moment, I thought she'd finally tell me. Instead, she leaned over, kissed my cheek, and quietly said, "Not tonight." A few days later, I received a call from Emma's younger sister, Sophie. She sounded nervous. "Hey, can we meet? Everything okay?" "Yeah, I need to ask you something." We met at a small coffee shop after work. Sophie barely touched her drink. She kept looking toward the window. Finally, she asked, "Has Emma talked to you?" "About what?" She hesitated. "About names." My heartbeat slowed. "You know?" She nodded. I thought she'd gotten over it. "Over what?" Sophie immediately looked down. I shouldn't have said anything. "Sophie," she shook her head. "No, it's not my place." "Then why ask?" "Because." She looked me straight in the eyes. I can tell she's doing it again. "What do you mean again?" Sophie took a deep breath. "There was a time when she stopped saying everyone's name." I frowned. "Everyone's?" She nodded. "Not just yours. My mom, my dad, me, friends, teachers, anyone." I stared at her. "Why?" She slowly shook her head. "I promised I'd never tell. Emma has to." "But," Sophie smiled sadly, "when she finally does, please don't be angry with her." Before I could ask another question, she stood up, left $20 on the table for the coffees, and walked away, leaving me with one sentence echoing in my head. "Not just yours." For the first time, I realized I'd been asking the wrong question all along. The mystery had never been, "Why won't my wife say my name?" The real question was, what happened that made her afraid to say anyone's? That night, I didn't tell Emma I'd met Sophie, not because I wanted to keep secrets, because I wanted Emma to tell me herself. If she'd hidden this for 13 years, there had to be a reason, a real one, not something I'd force out of her. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about one sentence. She stopped saying everyone's name, not mine. Everyone's, which meant whatever had happened before we met, long before I became part of her life. A week later, we drove to her parents' house for Sunday lunch. I'd been there dozens of times, maybe hundreds. Her parents treated me like family. Her dad and I watched football together. Her mom always packed leftovers for us to take home. Nothing ever felt unusual there. Until that afternoon, Emma was helping her mother in the kitchen. Her father and I were sitting outside on the patio. He was talking about replacing the fence when suddenly he stopped. "You've noticed it too." I looked at him. "What?" He sighed. "The names." For a second I forgot how to breathe. "You know?" He nodded. "We all know." "Then why has nobody told me?" He stared into his coffee for several seconds. "Because she asked us not to." "When?" 12 years ago. Right before your wedding." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "She actually asked everyone." He nodded again. "She said, if I don't use names around people, please don't mention it." I stared at him. "And you all agreed? What else were we supposed to do?" "I don't know." Ask why. We did. And? He smiled sadly. She cried. That's all? That's all. He leaned back in his chair. I've seen Emma cry twice in my life. The first time. And that day. So we stopped asking. I looked toward the kitchen window. Emma was laughing with her mother. She looked happy, completely normal. If I hadn't known, I'd never have guessed she carried something this heavy every single day. After lunch, we were looking through old family photo albums. Emma's mother loved doing that. She had boxes full of photographs dating back decades, birthdays, Christmases, school plays, vacations, every family milestone imaginable. I was flipping through one album when I noticed something. Every picture before Emma turned 19 had handwritten notes on the back. Her mother had labeled everyone: Emma, Sophie, Mom, Dad, Grandma, Uncle David. Then, the labels stopped. Completely. The photographs continued, but the names disappeared. Every caption became something like, Summer Vacation, Christmas Morning, At the Lake. Never another name. I quietly looked at Emma's mother. Did you stop labeling the pictures? She froze. Only for a moment. Then she smiled. Emma asked me to. Why? Her smile faded. I think. She looked toward her daughter. That's a question she still owes you. On the drive home, I barely spoke. Emma noticed. You okay? Yeah. You've been quiet. I'm just tired. She reached over and squeezed my hand. You've been doing that a lot lately. What? Thinking. I smiled. I guess. She looked out the passenger window. I miss when things felt simple. That sentence stayed with me. Not because of what she said, because of how she said it. Like she missed simple, too. 3 nights later, I woke up around 3 in the morning. Emma wasn't in bed. I assumed she'd gone downstairs for water. 10 minutes passed. She still hadn't come back. I walked quietly into the hallway. A faint light was coming from the spare bedroom. The door wasn't fully closed. I gently pushed it open. Emma was sitting on the floor. An old cardboard box lay open beside her. She hadn't heard me. Inside the box were school yearbooks, camp photographs, birthday cards, certificates. Every single one had something in common. Anywhere a name appeared, it had been covered, some with black marker, some with pieces of paper carefully glued over the words. Even birthday cards. Someone had written, Happy Birthday, Emma. Only, Emma had been covered with white tape. Every photograph with handwritten names, covered. Every certificate, covered. Every camp roster, covered. Dozens, hundreds, years of memories, painstakingly altered, not destroyed, just erased. My heart sank. I whispered, Emma. She gasped so violently she dropped the box. Papers scattered across the floor. She stared at me, then at the papers, then back at me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she closed her eyes and quietly said the words I'd been waiting weeks to hear. I think it's finally time I tell you what happened the day I stopped saying people's names. Emma slowly knelt down. Without saying a word, she began picking up the papers. Not frantically, not like someone trying to hide them, more like someone who already knew hiding was over. I knelt beside her. For the first time since we'd met, I didn't ask a single question. I simply helped. When the last photograph was back inside the box, she rested both hands on the lid. I was 18. Her voice was almost a whisper. It was the last week of summer. I worked as a counselor at a day camp. I stayed completely still. There were 32 kids. We'd spent the entire summer together. I knew every one of them. She smiled faintly. I knew every name. A tear rolled down her cheek. Especially one. I waited. There was a little girl named Lily. She followed me everywhere. She wanted to braid my hair. She wanted to sit next to me at lunch. She even cried on Fridays because camp was closed on weekends. Emma laughed softly through her tears. She told everyone she wanted to be just like me when she grew up. I smiled. I can believe that. She looked at me. No, you can't. Then her smile disappeared. The last Friday of camp, we took everyone to the lake. I felt my stomach tighten. The swimming area was completely safe. Lifeguards, life jackets, counselors everywhere. We'd done it dozens of times. She took a shaky breath. I was standing on the dock. The kids were all playing. Someone called my name. I frowned. What? I turned around. It was another counselor. He needed help carrying equipment. So I looked away. Only for a second. She closed her eyes. When I turned back, Lily was gone. The room became unbearably quiet. They found her, less than 3 minutes later. Emma couldn't continue. I gently took her hand. She squeezed it so tightly it hurt. The investigation said it wasn't my fault. There were 6 counselors, 2 lifeguards, the police, the camp, everyone. They all said exactly the same thing. She laughed bitterly. You couldn't have prevented it. She shook her head. But do you know what I remembered? I didn't answer. The last thing I heard, before I looked away, was someone saying my name. Another tear fell. My brain decided that if nobody had called me, I would have kept watching Lily. I slowly exhaled. I know that's irrational. I've known it for years. But every time I hear someone's name shouted, I go back there. Every time I think about saying someone's name in front of other people, I freeze. She looked down at the box. At first, I stopped saying everyone's name. My parents, Sophie, my friends, everyone. I couldn't do it. I tried. But every single time, I heard my own name right before I looked away. The pieces finally began fitting together. The therapy helped, she continued quietly. I learned to say names again, one by one. My mom, my dad, Sophie, my friends. I frowned, but she looked at me. When I met you, I fell in love. Her voice cracked, and suddenly, your name became the hardest one. Why? She smiled sadly. Because I loved you. I could force myself to say other people's names, but yours. She looked away. If something happened to you, I knew exactly what my brain would tell me. It would say, you shouldn't have said his name. I felt my chest tighten. So every time we were around other people, I stopped myself, not because I believed it, she quickly added, but because my anxiety always whispered, what if this is the time you're wrong? Silence filled the room. I hated it, she whispered. I hated every second of it. I hated watching myself avoid one simple word. I hated lying to you. I hated pretending I didn't know what you were talking about. She looked me straight in the eyes. But I hated the thought of losing you even more. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then I asked the question I'd been carrying since the beginning. So all those years, you knew? She nodded. Every birthday, every dinner, every party, every family gathering, I knew. And every single time, I wanted to say, Jake. A tear rolled down her face, but the word always stopped right here. She touched her throat, as if someone was holding it there. She laughed quietly. Can you imagine? A 40-year-old woman, afraid of saying her husband's name. I reached forward, placed both hands on her face. No, I said softly. I see a woman who spent 20 years blaming herself for something she couldn't control. She broke down completely, not with loud sobs, just silent tears, the kind that come from carrying the same weight for far too long. When she finally looked back at me, she whispered, I don't want to be afraid anymore. Emma looked at me for a long time, long enough that I wondered if she regretted telling me at all. Then she quietly asked, will you come with me tomorrow? Where? The lake. I didn't hesitate. Of course. The next afternoon we drove almost 2 hours. Neither of us talked much. Emma spent most of the drive staring out the window. When we finally arrived, it wasn't what I'd expected. There was no camp anymore. The old buildings had been torn down years ago. The dock was gone. Most of the shoreline had been reclaimed by trees. Only the lake remained, calm, silent, almost beautiful. Emma walked ahead of me until she stopped near the water. I haven't been here in 20 years. She took a slow breath. I've wanted to, 1,000 times. But every time I tried, I turned the car around. We stood there without speaking. Finally, she smiled sadly. Do you know the worst part? I shook my head. I don't actually remember Lily's voice anymore. I remember her laugh. I remember the way she smiled. I remember the pink backpack she carried. But I can't remember her voice. She looked at the water. The only thing I remember clearly is hearing someone shout, Emma, and turning around. Another long silence. Then she looked at me. I've spent 20 years believing 1 second defined my entire life. I reached for her hand. It didn't. I know that. She smiled. My therapist has been telling me that for years. I blinked. You've been in therapy? She nodded. On and off. For almost 10 years. You never told me. I was embarrassed. You never had to be. I know. She looked down. I just wasn't ready. I suddenly understood why the problem had changed over time. At first she couldn't say anyone's name. Then, little by little, she'd gotten better. Except mine. Because loving me had made the fear stronger, not weaker. Over the next several months, things didn't magically change. There wasn't one conversation that fixed everything. There wasn't one breakthrough. Some days were good, some weren't. Sometimes she'd still stop herself halfway through saying my name. Sometimes she'd smile awkwardly and say, "My husband." Then we'd both laugh, not because it was funny, because neither of us had to pretend anymore. We started seeing her therapist together once a month. For the first time, I understood how anxiety really worked. It wasn't logical. It wasn't a choice. It was your brain trying to protect you by convincing you danger was everywhere, even in something as harmless as a name. One Saturday afternoon, we hosted a barbecue. Our families came. Friends from work, neighbors, almost 20 people filled the backyard. Kids were running through the sprinklers. Someone had music playing. My dad was burning hamburgers despite insisting he was a grill master. It felt normal. I was carrying a tray of drinks toward the patio when I realized I'd forgotten the bottle opener inside. I turned around and walked back into the house. A minute later, I heard Emma outside. She was talking to everyone, laughing. Then I heard footsteps behind me. She had come looking. She stopped in the kitchen doorway. For a second, I saw it. That familiar hesitation. Her lips parted, her shoulders tensed. The same battle I'd watched for weeks. No one inside the house but us, 20 people outside, waiting. Then, from the backyard, Tom shouted, "Hey! Where'd you two disappear to?" Emma looked toward the open back door, then back at me. I smiled. No pressure, no expectation, just a smile. She took one slow breath, turned toward the backyard, and called, "Jake!" Everything outside went quiet, not because anyone thought it was strange. To everyone else, a wife had simply called her husband. That was all. But I watched Emma, her eyes filled with tears. For a split second, she stood completely still, waiting, as though part of her expected the world to fall apart. It didn't. The music kept playing. Children kept laughing. Someone dropped a plate. Tom yelled, "Finally! We've been waiting on you." A few people laughed. Life simply continued. Emma looked back at me. She laughed through her tears. A real laugh. The kind I'd fallen in love with 13 years earlier. When I walked over to her, she whispered, "I said it. You did." And nothing happened. I wrapped my arms around her. No, nothing happened. She rested her head against my chest. For a long moment we just stood there, listening to the ordinary sounds of an ordinary afternoon. Then she quietly said my name again, not because she needed my attention, not because anyone was listening, just because she finally could. "Jake," I smiled. "Yeah? I've missed saying your name." I kissed her forehead. "I've missed hearing it." Sometimes people think healing is a single moment, a dramatic breakthrough, a perfect ending. It isn't. Healing is often much quieter than that. Sometimes, it's simply saying one word you've been afraid of for 20 years. And realizing the world is still there when you're finished.